No risk it, no biscuit.
Coming from the Arizona desert, presented by SBNation.com. For Arizona Cardinals fans, by Arizona Cardinals fans, with outsider and insider's perspectives, this is Revenge of the Birds. Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans. This is Revenge of the Birds Radio. I'm your host, Jess Root, and I'm on the line with Seth Cox as we, after a bye week, have our All Cardinals show. We had a little bit of life difficulties a week ago between schedules and stuff going on that prevented us from having a show after the Cleveland Browns game, in which the Cardinals did win 34-10. But they entered the bye week after the win, 6-2, and they're back at this recording on a Tuesday night. They are back at practice today. They had their bonus practice of the week as they prepare for the first of two Sunday night football games. Since we last had our show, the Cardinals, well, it was always scheduled that this coming Sunday, the Week 10 matchup between the Arizona Cardinals and Seattle Seahawks in CenturyLink Field will be on Sunday Night Football. But the news that came out was last week that CBS decided to flex the Cardinals-Bengals game from NBC decided to flex it from the afternoon CBS broadcast to Sunday Night Football. So for 2 weeks in a row, the Cardinals will be on Sunday Night Football. Only the second of the two games will be at University of Phoenix Stadium. Nothing else changes, but it's the matchup of the week. It is, looking at the schedule, it's the most intriguing game on the schedule. The now 6-2 Cardinals up against the undefeated 8-0 Cincinnati Bengals. Two teams that put up points. So it should be a fun offensive game to watch, ideally. And with the smaller storyline of Carson Palmer getting to face the team he allegedly quit on and took on an owner and things like that. We're not going to talk so much about that, but tonight we're going to be, as we're just leaving the bye, we've hit the midpoint of the season, and we're going to talk about the Cardinals and how they've done so far. We're going to grade each position area. We're going to grade the season so far. We're going to talk about who our offensive and defensive MVPs are. Look ahead to the schedule for the second half, which is much more difficult, at least on paper, than the first half of the season was. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the Seattle game. But Seth, how are you this Tuesday night? How are everything going?
It's going well. Just getting ready for a big Sunday night game. I got 2 weeks in a row now, so it'll be interesting. Hopefully the first one goes well, so we don't lose some steam going back.
Absolutely. We didn't get to talk much about we didn't give, at least on the show, didn't talk about the Cleveland game. It was kind of the tale of two halves. First half, they looked terrible. The Cardinals looked bad, and we were like, oh my gosh. But then, snap, turned it around, and they became a dominant team. They held, after getting down 20-10, they scored 24 straight points, really kept the Browns in check, hurt Josh McCown. That, I'm sure that had something to do with it. But they came up with plays, and I actually got to speak with Tony Jefferson as a part of a promotional type thing for the new Call of Duty game. He was out peddling that new game, and I got to talk to him. I asked him what was the highlight of the season, and he said that was the highlight of the season, to go from what they were doing to come back and dominate the way they did. He said it gave them the confidence they need to know if they're ever in a situation like that again, that they'll be able to do it. Granted, it's against a woeful Browns team, but it is a Browns team that has played a lot of teams tough, despite the losses. So you take the good with you take the good out of the win. You look at the first half and you say you got some concerns, but looking forward, if you had, let's talk about the midpoint of the season. Entering this week, I think both of us, might have said, I don't actually recall what our predictions were, but probably 6-2, 7-1. We're probably right at where we thought the Cardinals would be at this point. Is that what I seem to think? We both might have had them at 6-2 at this point.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Maybe I had them at 5-3. I honestly don't remember, but no, I really don't remember. Maybe I was into the Steelers and Ravens. I really didn't think they'd lose to St. Louis. So,
Nope.
So
well, yeah, and that's which is interesting because the talk this season is about how the Cardinals haven't really played anyone, and then the two teams that were of any sort of quality at all, they happened to lose to, and not only lose to, but they had their struggles. They had some real struggles that they saw of kind of almost self-inflicted with the turnovers and the red zone issues. But when you look at the schedule to start the season, everyone talked about how tough this schedule was. In fact, at the beginning, entering the season, if you're just basing it on last year's records, they had the 5th most difficult schedule in the league. Which at this point, halfway through the season, 6-2, and everyone's talking about how they haven't played anyone. Well, wait a minute. That narrative changed an awful quickly, which is, well, strength of schedule is really something you can't judge until the season comes around. And even then, the first half of the schedule seemed, tougher than it actually was. And now moving forward, you've got yourself a real formidable 8 games. Not only they've got 4 of their 6 division games left on the slate. They've got pretty much every single game, with the exception of San Francisco, are teams who legitimately feel that they are in the playoff run. There's not a single game they're either expected to make the playoffs or really in the mix for making the playoffs. At this point, looking forward, how optimistic are you for what is to come?
I think you have to be excited about where they position themselves. Obviously we can lament the 2 losses based on what we know now. But I think overall you have to be happy with where they're at. Like I said, this upcoming game really, it's really going to swing, I don't want to say the balance of the season, because I don't think this is, I have a very hard time seeing the Arizona Cardinals not in the playoffs in 2015. That's just how I feel based on what they've done so far. But, when you look at it and you look at how well the Cardinals have played, up the first half of the season, and how legitimately average the Seahawks are, record-wise and everything, if the Seahawks win, there's a 1-game difference in the standing. And all of a sudden, all the goodwill and all the, momentum, everything down and changed and blah, blah, blah. So, I think it's just an interesting place that they put themselves in, because as good as it feels, this game really swings the balance of the West. The Cardinals still hold are still in the driver's seat, quote unquote, but all of a sudden they're just up 1 game, and then one more, Pittsburgh with Landry Jones type performance, and all of a sudden it's tied up, and then all of a sudden there's desperation. So you have to be excited with where they're at, but with hesitation of, all right, let's see it, now in the second half, like you said, where it looks like the second half of the season, there's only 1 game you go, okay, you definitely should win, especially if playing the average still starting.
Yes, indeed. So let's look at the first half of the season. Let's do a little bit of grading. That's the thing we like to do this time of year, is grade things. Everyone likes grades. Everyone likes lists. Everyone likes power rankings, mock drafts, things like that. So let's do some grading. If you had to grade the team as a whole, what would you give it for the first half of the season? I would give it a solid A-. No, B+. I'd give it a B+. The loss at home to the Rams, very disappointing. To me, that was an absolute. I mean, if there's a game that I think that will come back to bite them in the rear, it is that game, because it was winnable, they played very poorly themselves. St. Louis had a perfect game plan and executed it perfectly, and the Cardinals still almost beat them because of almost self-inflicted wounds. You could point to 2 or 3 plays that were absolutely self-inflicted. The Pittsburgh game, in hindsight now, you look at, oh my gosh, they should have won, and they should be sitting at 8-0. However, when you enter the season, you don't see that game in Pittsburgh you don't chalk that up as a win in the first place. So that's not nearly as disappointing. It's a loss to an AFC team, which also doesn't affect much in terms of playoff seeding and tiebreakers. So I'd have to give them a solid B+, because they've been, aside from the second half hiccup in Pittsburgh and some red zone issues against St. Louis, they've really been quite a dominant team.
Yeah, and I'm with you on the B+. I think I said it the last show we had, and it holds true. St. Louis at the end of the year, when you look back, the loss isn't going to be as bad as it was at the time. And the Pittsburgh loss, it's going to be difficult to say because of all the injuries they've had, but the Pittsburgh loss is still going to look like a Pittsburgh loss, just a loss to Pittsburgh, not a loss to Landry Jones. And I think that's what the big deal was. You know, lost to Landry Jones as opposed to
Ben Roethlisberger. It wasn't Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown. It happened to be Landry Jones and Martavis Bryant.
Right, but nobody's going to remember that.
No.
At the end of the season. So I think when you look at it, you're exactly right. You're right at. If you're not at a B+, you're scraping at it. You're as a teacher. You're an 8.7 or an 8. Like, you're right there, and so I think you have to be. You probably, to stay with the teaching metaphor, the student probably just didn't turn in a couple assignments, is what it ended up being.
Yeah.
So as opposed to not, bombing a test or something like that.
Offensive side of the ball, I'm going to give it a grade overall. Just as an offensive unit, you have to give this unit an A. Yeah, they've had a couple of hiccups, but just the way that they've been just moving the ball down the field, the points that they put up, yeah, they had a couple of hiccups. Second half of Pittsburgh, part of the game against St. Louis, and then the first half against Cleveland. But this offense has been rolling. You really can't put it less than an A in my opinion, just because, you've got Carson Palmer, one of the top passers in the league. You've got Chris Johnson, one of the top rushers in the league. You've got Larry Fitzgerald, among the top pass catchers in the league. John Brown. You look at the offensive unit, this is as good an offensive unit as we've ever seen in Arizona.
You're right, and they're putting it all together, which is nice. And, we lamented on it since the Bruce Arians' arrival, and I've written on it. You've talked about it and written on it. The Arians' offense, for as prolific as it is through the air, really is, at the heart, a ground-based offense to function fully. We saw it when he was in Pittsburgh. His greatest successes were, when he was running the ball a lot and effectively with, fast Willie Parker and when they got away from that and he started to kind of, build the offense around Big Ben, that's when, they were still the Steelers, but they weren't winning, So now it's interesting and the just excellent, balance and the ability to just beat teams on the ground and kind of demoralize them. It's something that we've seen opponents do to the Cardinals before, and I think that's why it's so much fun to watch, because you have an offensive line, especially on that left side with Mike Iupati and Jared Beldier, where you're able to kind of inflict pain on the opponent and really just run the ball down their throats. Jonathan Cooper has had spurts of really good play, while Sindeline has been a nice steady influence. I am interested to see what happens in Seattle if they keep Shipley start. I know people have said, oh, well, he started in the Arians offense before, and blah, blah, blah. There was a reason Lyle Sindeline come back and then, didn't start the entire preseason and beat him out. So, I am interested to see if there is a drop-off there. And then Bobby Massey, the PFF report, came out, called him the weakling or whatever it was of the Cardinals' offensive line for the first half of the season. I haven't graded him nearly as poorly as they have, but they do like to discount players from touches, and so that that hurts. So I feel like Massey and Cooper are definitely an upgrade of what Massey and Larson or Faneca were last year. So I think you have to be happy with how the offensive line is growing, and it's really led to, like you said, just an all-around excellent first half of the season from the offense.
It's going to sound like a broken record from me, because if you go position by position, quarterback, you look at the play of Carson Palmer. Can you give him anything less than an A+, really?
No, I think I don't know if we texted about this. I know I texted somebody about this, but there's only 3 guys in the NFL right now that, and I'm talking right now, not long term, not just so don't kill me when Andrew Luck's not the pick. But there's only 3 guys in the NFL right now that I think you could put in the Cardinals offense and have the same success. And those 3 guys for me are Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, obviously, and surprisingly, it's probably Cam Newton. I think you take any of those 3 guys and you don't really miss a beat. But nobody else in the league, I really feel that way about. And, that's a huge change for me in terms of what I've seen from Palmer and how I've seen his play. So I'm with you that A+, you can lament the boneheaded plays in Pittsburgh and say, okay, it's an A instead of an A+, but that's really just.
But even if you look at the quarterback play, if you look historically of quarterback play of the Arizona Cardinals, and if you even look at the high end, the Kurt Warner days, 2008, 2009, which was the sort of the apex, the top of the line quarterback play that we've seen, Palmer's outplaying that. Kurt Warner, we remember probably he had some boneheaded throws that he would make as well. Every once in a while, every quarterback does. But we're seeing a historic year in terms of quarterback play from a Card. The greatest season we might have ever seen was Kurt Warner in 2008 or 2009. Palmer's on pace to just absolutely obliterate that season statistically.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to 2 things. Obviously how well Palmer's playing, but much like the Chicago Bears and Jay Cutler, becoming the franchise leader in touchdown passes, when a different era, 1, but 2, my God, how awful has the quarterback play been for the Arizona Cardinals?
Yes, it has.
And that's not a dig at Carson Palmer at all.
No, not at all. It's just our history is terrible. Terrible.
People like to point out and bring up that, Warner had 5 years to do what he did, and Palmer's only his 3rd year. Well, let's be fair. Warner had 2.5 seasons. The first, 1.5 or 2.5 seasons, he was riding the bench, and then he was the 2-minute offense for Matt Leinart and Ken Wisenhunt. I don't know if Cardinals fans remember that, but I vividly remember that, and because it was infuriating.
Odd. It was odd.
Yeah. So, but Palmer's basically done it in 2 seasons. what he's done. And so if you look at it, it's very similar outside of one thing. And we talk about this on Twitter all the time. There's a faction of people that don't think it matters. I happen to be one person that does think it matters. But quarterback wins. Palmer's the best, and winning percentage, obviously. But that's and people don't like to acknowledge that as an important stat or whatever. But it really is. Like if Palmer was putting up these numbers, and these are a little bit better than his career best, but it's not like, I mean, if he ends up he's at 19 right now, or is he at 20?
20. He's got 20.
Okay, so if he ends up at 40 and what's he at, 6 or 7 interceptions?
Yes, he's at 6. He's got 20 and 6 right now.
Yeah, so if
you do 40 and 12, holy crap!
If he ends up at 40 and 12, that's 10 more touchdowns, I think, 2 less interceptions than his absolute career best. But at the end of the day, we're all going to remember what happens in January well over the, we'll be happy with it, and we'll talk about it in a great light, but it's not going to be nearly as important to fans if all this is just, window dressing to a disappointment in the postseason. And so that's ultimately, when we talk about the Warner-Palmer comparison, that's really the only thing that matters in the end, I think, is what happens in the playoffs. And, but, yeah, right now, he's been, like you said, near perfection.
Running back, between Chris Johnson's resurgence to Andre Ellington completely disappearing and then just some huge plays by David Johnson, again, this is going to be the broken record, I think, for me, at least on the offense. You can't give that running game anything less than an A, considering we're seeing things from a Cardinals running game we've never seen before. Chris Johnson he's on pace for over 1,300 yards. I mean, Stump Mitchell, their running backs coach, who was the last guy to run for 100 yards in a game 4 times in a season. Chris Johnson's already done that, and Stump Mitchell did it 30 years ago. Johnson's already reached that this year. They're talking about, maybe Johnson leading the league in rushing, and
I don't
come
think
on,
that's going to happen. Because I just don't think he's going to get the bulk of carries that Adrian Peterson's going to get.
Right.
I don't know how much Minnesota Vikings. I almost said Timberwolves because I have basketball in the background. I don't know how much Minnesota Vikings Cardinals fans have watched, but my goodness, they lean on that guy so much.
Well, just the thought that that's even in the conversation is absurd. If you have any memory of the Cardinals at all, that it's literally absurd.
I think if he ends up as a top 5, even if he ends up at 1,300 yards and ends up as the 4 or 5, 4th or 5th highest leading rusher in the NFL, nobody's going to complain about that, because you're going to have a top probably 4 or 5 quarterback in terms of statistics, and a top 4 or 5 running back, and then probably 2 top 10 to 15 wide receivers. So it's going to be a really dynamically and balanced offense.
Well, and the one story that hasn't, I mean, it's not much to talk about because of how Chris Johnson is playing, just how much Andre Ellington has disappeared. He's become just a guy. and it's probably going to continue to be that all year as long as Johnson's playing the way he's playing, because he is such a better running back overall. He may not be as dynamic as Andre, but he's just such a better running back overall. You can't take him off the field hardly.
Yeah, and that's something you and I talked about before the season, and you and I were on the same page with this. So he's really the better running back, and we weren't trying to take a shot at Andre, especially. I mean, I coined the free Ellington movement in 2013, and you have but you have to, as is being talked about greatly on Twitter right now, you can't die on hills for players. And when you miss, you just have to move on. It's not that Andre Ellington's a bad player at all. It's just that he's not an every down back, and that's okay. But in Bruce Arians' offense, something that if we go all the way back to episode 2 or 3 of this show when we talked about the hire and all that good stuff, we talked about the fact that Bruce Arians likes to have a kind of a one-man backfield in a back that gets 60 to 70% of the carries, and they'll have a back that does the David Johnson and Andre Ellington type work where they get a couple carries and a couple catches a game. But he's really, like I said, he's getting back to the offenses that were great in Pittsburgh as opposed to the really fun to watch throw the ball over the field offenses of late Pittsburgh, Indy, and Arizona for the first 2 games.
Looking at the other offensive units, look at the offensive line, receivers, tight ends. How I grade those out is offensive line, despite, we have some concerns about the right side of the line, you have to give the offensive line an A. Receivers, I think you have to give an A. Tight ends, I think it's a
tight ends
B or a C.
Tight ends is probably a C just because they haven't been as good in the passing, or as effective in the passing game, and they've had some inconsistency in the run game. If you could pinpoint one weakness through the first 8 weeks, it'd be the tight ends on offense. And that's, again, we're talking nitpick. We're not talking anything serious, but we're just talking nitpick.
And we're also talking about a group that, entering the season, at least in the offseason, anything higher, I'm looking at last season, that was a position that you probably gave an F to. And they're playing at a C level, which means, hey, that's a huge improvement.
Well, and you have to also remember that they've lost Darren Fells to an injury. Jermaine Gresham was basically non-existent, right, for the first 3 or 4 weeks. So, yeah, it's just one of those things where you just watch and you hope that things improve. I think we saw a little bit of Troy Nicholas in the Cleveland game, obviously with the two receiving touchdowns.
Yeah.
I don't think he had any other catches, so that's good efficiency.
He had one catch the week before for 13 yards. I think that's it. So he's got 3 catches this year for 2 touchdowns, almost as good as Joseph Faria for when he was with Detroit. The offensive line, I have to give it. The offensive line, you have to give an A. Overall, you can nitpick a little bit, but look, Palmer's only been sacked 11 times in 8 games, and they're one of the better teams at running the football. They're running the ball well. They're protecting Carson Palmer. Well, can you really complain about that in the end? No, you can't.
No, you can't. And the other thing is you have to be okay with what you've gotten from them so far. Like I said, it's been, if you look at Upati and what he's done, he's exactly what he thought he was. He is a just absolutely dominant run blocking guard, and he's an average pass blocking guard. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. And then you look at, Valdir has taken a step back this year, so to speak, but not really. He's not, he's again, I think he's actually gone back to where he was before as a pass blocker, but he's such a good run blocker. It's just interesting how good of a run blocking offensive line they've built, and they're still, a quote-unquote passing team. But it works now, and it's working better because they can run the football, so all the play action works, and teams can't just pin their ears back because if they do, they have to worry about Chris Johnson.
Now, moving to the defensive side, I want to move kind of quickly, so we'll talk about them as a whole, not get because they've been good. I think you have to give the defensive backs a clear A. They've been fantastic. The edge, you have to give maybe a C. The inside linebacker between Kevin Minter and Dale Buchanan, a solid B. And the defensive line, I think, is a good solid B. I would give the defensive unit overall a solid B. They've had their moments. I mean, they obviously the Todd Gurley fourth quarter was bad. They don't generate a pass rush, otherwise they get up there, but they're playmakers in turnovers, so that is in their favor. Although if the more I think about it, it's kind of absurd for me to give them a B, even though they're a top 5 defense statistically. But I don't feel that they've played as well as they can. So I can't in my mind give them completely an A, even though the numbers say that they are.
And I'm kind of the opposite of you. Outside of one player on the defensive line and their secondary, and I'll include Buchanan kind of in that mix. I would, and it kind of works out perfectly. I would say like half of their defense is an A, and the other half of the defense is a C. And when you put it together, you get the B that you talked about. But I think the fact that those A's are so good that they weight up the averageness of the rest of that defense. I mean, you're talking about a very average, entire linebacking core. And that's not a negative thing. People are going to say it's negative. No, it's really not. Talent-wise, you just look at them. They're just not. No, they're just not dynamic football players. They're very solid, if not spectacular football players, but they're playing at a very high level, despite that, maybe not having the most dynamic athletes. Asking a Rodney Gutcher, who's probably best at that 3-tech position that Frosty Rutgers playing so well, asking him to 2-gap as a nose guard and 0 technique, something probably not best at. You're asking Dale Buchanan to play inside linebacker at 200, maybe 20 pounds. You're asking, Kevin Minter to play a lot of passing down, and he's held up for the most part in those situations. And then you're asking a bunch of guys that really don't have a lot of pass rushing skill to pass rush. We joked about it last episode, but Dwight Freeney came off the street at 34 years old, and he was their best pass rusher. And I don't think that's changed at all. And
no.
And so you look at this team, you look at how they're built, you look at everything, and you say, okay, like they have 5 guys. Like I said, you could put Buchanan kind of in that. They have 5 guys for sure that you can look at and go, they could probably start on any team in the NFL. Maybe not Tony Jefferson, but I think between Rashad,
he starts on most teams. I think Tony Jefferson starts on most teams.
Well, and that's because, and again, not a shot at Tony. He's been great, but that's also because safety play is awful in the NFL. Like, just awful. But I think when you look at it, you look at it and you go, okay, the fact that they have so much average talent on that defense starting, and that they are 4th or 5th in the NFL, you're okay with that, and I think you can give them an A. If you go by units, like I said, you have maybe an A or B on the defensive line. You have probably a very high C on the linebacking core, and then you have an A in the secondary. So it really evens out to be right around.
Talk about offensive. I want just briefly, in terms of time, offensive defensive MVP. If I had to pick a guy on the offensive side, I say it's Chris Johnson. You could say Carson Palmer for all this, but I think Chris Johnson's been the difference maker. His effectiveness in the running game has really changed the entire outlook of the offense. While defensively, people will say, hey, maybe it's Calais Campbell, Tyrann Mathieu has been a beast. It's the play of Patrick Peterson for me, simply because he has basically erased a receiver every single game.
Yeah, I think I like the Johnson pick. Um, Palmer's the easy one because he has all the numbers, but I think you're right with Chris Johnson. Defensively, I'm going to stay with Tyrann Mathieu because I think the fact that they don't have a pass rush and that they're able to do so much with him rushing the passer and also dropping in the coverage. He's given up 2 or 3 touchdowns, but he's been very, very good all year. And he makes more dynamic plays than anybody else on the team. And it always seems like he makes the play at a crucial time. And so I think when you look at it, I would stay with you on the offensive side, but I would go with Tyrann on the other side.
Looking at the schedule moving ahead, I think I'm going to write about it, so I might see this in print in a bit. I look ahead to the actual, for me, the next 4 games, 3 of them are on the road against the division. So they got Seattle on the road, then they come home for the Cincinnati game, and then they're on the road for San Francisco and St. Louis, closing out their schedule on the road in the division. These 3 games, I think, are the most important games. I've said from last year, I said through the beginning of last year, for the Cardinals to win this division, 4-2 in the division, I believe is a requirement. I think. They could pull it out depending on things, but those division games became so crucial, important, and that loss to St. Louis really made things much more difficult. It now makes, in St. Louis, a must-win. It makes San Francisco, of course, a must-win. And then you have to win one of those 2 games against the Seahawks. Now, the Cardinals, if they somehow pull off a 3-0 record on the road, if they win all 3 of these division games, they put the division away, in my opinion. If they can win these next 4 games, and I'm still saying, or even just 3 out of 4, win all 3 of those road games, the division's done. Because there is nothing more than I would like to see, since we did have the possibility, we talked about on a previous show, where the Cardinals might end up playing Week 17, the Seahawks at home in Week 17, with the likelihood, it could happen, that they end up hosting them the very next week for Wild Card Weekend. Obviously, the Cardinals want to have home field advantage, or at least get a bye. But I want, if nothing else in the world, if that is on the table, for that Week 17 game to mean nothing. And they can just throw out, they can start Drew Stanton that game and rest a Palmer and not really game plan, so they don't really see much until the next week. So I think that these next 4 games are absolutely crucial. I think they need to beat Cincinnati for reputation's purpose. It would be great for the national look if they can knock down an undefeated team in Cincinnati or a one-loss team in Cincinnati, and then to sweep their road schedule would be just absolutely, that would put the division away. It would knock off the possibility of St. Louis having a tiebreaker over them. It would it would give them those 4 division wins that they need and check off the list, and then after that, they can play for seeding rather than fighting for the division.
Yeah, and I think that really does matter going forward. You look at the 4-game stretch that you just hit on, and the importance of it. And again, it's a road game and it's a division game, and the 49ers are where the Cardinals were, 4 years ago. So, as a fan, you like to have hope and like to think that your team isn't awful, but man, it would be really disappointing if the Cardinals lost to San Francisco. That being said, the rest of it, I'm with you. Like, I have a hard time being confident going into Seattle, just because it's still Seattle, and as bad as they've looked, like I said, this game basically is the difference between wrapping up the division probably in week 13 or 14, and having to, that week 17 game probably something.
And one thing it would do, it squashes Seattle. Seattle's got some confidence right now. Kill it. Stomp on it and say, no, it's our division now.
Well, and the thing is, if it's a close game and the Cardinals lose in a gut-wrencher, they played with them, yada, yada, yada. If Seattle comes out and makes a statement, oh, goodness. Because we've seen Seattle do that before. And not against Arizona. Well, maybe against Arizona, but not against Arizona necessarily. But we've seen where they've made a statement before in a win, and then all of a sudden, they just looked unstoppable. And you don't want to get that momentum rolling. You don't want them to have the idea that they're in this division. Because like you said, the gap seems really, really sizable right now. So let's keep that illusion alive and make it more of a reality. You look at the schedule, and that Philadelphia game is going to suck just because it's going to be Philly in December. It's going to be cold. It's going to be snowy. And Philly's probably going to be playing for their playoff lives at the time. And then Green Bay, I don't even know what to expect from the game anymore because they look completely lost right now. They look like a shell of themselves. So it comes back to now, okay, is this and we can't forget Minnesota because that's on a Thursday night. And I think that right after we play in St. Louis, right? So they go to St. Louis, and then they come home and
they turn around. So they're going to be going physical, and then on a short week, yeah.
And Minnesota's physical too. Minnesota and St. Louis are very mirror images of each other right now. But anyway, so yeah, you'd like to be able to at least start the second half of your season off strong, and make that statement that you are to be reckoned with in the NFC. And then you've got a chance, then, like you said, to kind of make a statement in the NFL, saying, something that we talked about after or right before the Pittsburgh loss was that, are the Cardinals, favorites or are they contenders? Right now they're in that contenders category. The favorites are New England and Cincy. And I think you can put Carolina in there now. The fact that they're 8-0 and they beat, a lot of good teams in tough games. So I think you look at them and maybe even Denver. And then there's the next tier of teams, with Green Bay now and Arizona and those guys. And I think a win in Seattle puts you back on okay, we're right at that top of the contenders list. But a win over the Bengals, then all of a sudden you're talking probably the favorite, if not the second favorite in the NFC. And that's a huge statement, like you said, where it's not just we beat faltering Seattle team, because that's what the narrative will be. I'm just telling you now, Cardinals fans. If the Cardinals win, it's that Seattle's faltering and things haven't been right all season, and it wasn't anything the Cardinals did. So, but if you're able to beat Seattle and Cincy in back-to-back weeks on prime time, that's gonna be a statement, and that's a statement that the rest of the NFL can take notice of.
And that will bring us to the end of another Revenge of the Birds Radio All Cardinals show. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Hey, we've got a huge game this weekend in Seattle. The beginning of the brutal second half for the Cardinals. And if the Cardinals are who we think they are who we thought they were. No, if this team is as good as we all believe that they are, this will be at the beginning of a very special second half of the season. It starts in Seattle. It ends against Seattle at home. Hopefully this is the beginning of the road to a very successful postseason run for Arizona. On behalf of Revenge of the Birds Radio, that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. We will be back. I'm not sure if I'm going to have a preview show for Seattle, but we will definitely be back to I'll talk all Cardinals after, hopefully, a win over the Seahawks. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Have a good night, everyone.
You've been listening to Revenge of the Birds. Keep the conversation going by visiting revengeofthebirds.com. Follow us on Twitter at Revenge of Birds. You can also find us on iTunes at facebook.com/Revenge of the Birds.